All right. Well, welcome everybody. So glad you're here with us today. My name is Eileen Oshesky. I'm the Chief Engagement Officer here at Aquifer, and I am happy to welcome you to our Educator to Educator webinar on teaching with Aquifer's integrated illness scripts, a quick start guide. And we're going to go till 3:50, and I hope you find this to be a really valuable session. I'm having a little trouble with, there we go, advancing my slides. Great. And I want to start out with saying welcome to our Aquifer curricular partners as well. Aquifer curricular partners are partners who subscribe to our whole curriculum, all 5 of our signature courses. And you all have access to the beta set of scripts for the 2021-22 subscription year. So it's currently 21 integrated illness scripts we'll be talking about today. We're releasing more each quarter. And those of you who have access will find them right on your Aquifer courses page. Today, what we're going to do is we'll go over an introduction to the integrated illness scripts. We'll talk about cognitive integration. What is cognitive integration? What are we trying to achieve? What the scripts are and how they help us achieve that. And then most importantly, I think how you can use the integrated illness scripts in your curriculum. We'll have time at the end for some question and answer with you all. A couple of logistic notes. If you have questions as we're going through, if it's a simple question like, hey, I have copies of these slides later, you can go ahead and put it in chat. But questions that you'd like answered by one of our educators at the end, you can handle in 2 ways. You can put them in the Q&A panel, which should be down at the bottom, I believe, on the right side of your screen. And I'll come back and moderate them at the end. Or we're going to try this time as well. If you have a question you'd like to just ask it live, you can raise your hand. We've got folks in the back, they'll promote you so you can come on screen, share your video, and you can ask your question live. So either way, you can ask it live or you can put it in chat and I'll ask it for you. The integrated illness scripts we're talking about are part of a long-standing collaboration between Aquifer and the International Association for Medical Science Educators. And the goal for over this 8-year, 9-year, maybe at this point, partnership is really to develop and disseminate teaching and learning tools that promote the cognitive integration and the collaborative teaching of basic science and clinical sciences across the health professions. The scripts now, as I said, we've got an intro set of them out. These are really an evidence-based tool. They're developed by educators, the educators that you're going to meet on today's webinar, and they're ready-made tools, to really help you promote cognitive integration with your learners. They provide a framework or a mental model for how you link the basic science and the clinical education. And most importantly, they're explaining that why behind the conditions for deeper understanding. Why is this happening? The causal mechanisms are right there. And as my friend Leah Sheridan says, you'll get to meet later, the why is always right there for the learner. So with that, I'm going to introduce our great panel of educators who will be joining us today. We'll start out with a presentation from Dr. Leslie Fall, Chief Executive Officer here at Aquifer, as well as Amy Wilson-Delfoss, who is a Senior Director on our Sciences Project and Associate Dean for Curriculum at Case Western Reserve University. Dr. James Nixon, who's also a lead on our Sciences Project and Vice Chair of Education at University of Minnesota, and Dr. Kit No, who's a clinical lead on our Sciences Project and an Assistant Dean at Loma Linda University. After the presentation, we'll have a Q&A, and for the Q&A, Dr. No will be with us, as well as Dr. Leah Sheridan. Leah is a professor of physiology at the Ohio University College of Osteopathic Medicine. So I hope you enjoy the presentation, and I will be back with you in about 30 minutes to manage the question and answer with you all. Thank you. I'm ready for you, Dr.
Welcome. I'm so glad to be here today. I'm Dr. Leslie Fall, CEO of Aquifer and the co-director of the Aquifer Sciences Initiative. I'd like to start out by sharing with you the purpose of our work. Our foundational goal is to educate students to make better, safer clinical decisions that are supported by sound biomedical reasoning. We believe that bringing together basic science and clinical knowledge in a deeply integrated way will help students build the expertise they need to become more efficient learners and more effective clinicians. Creating a deeper and more systematic understanding of the causal mechanisms underlying a given disease is an important step towards improving patient care and reducing harm as we drive to advance diagnostic accuracy and practice patient-centered, high-value care. All too often, though, inaccurate or delayed diagnoses, inappropriate testing, or ineffective or incorrect medical management not only result in harm to individualized patients, but also impacts the entire healthcare system as a whole. It is estimated that more than 12 million Americans experience some sort of diagnostic error each year, and that 1 in 3 healthcare dollars are wasted, driven by unnecessary services, inefficient delivery of services, or misprevention. The national costs related to these problems are estimated to exceed $100 billion per year. For me, and I'm sure for many of you, this is not an abstract concept or distant headline, but a reflection of my own personal experience. My journey into this work began over 20 years ago as both a pediatric hospitalist and a clerkship and residency program director, working side by side with medical students and residents. During rounds, I became increasingly frustrated and at times alarmed by my trainees' inability to leverage and use the basic sciences they had clearly mastered in the pre-clerkship curriculum to make routine patient care decisions about diagnosis, workup, and management. This was especially apparent in my mission to reduce unnecessary testing and the use of expensive and often questionable empiric therapies. Many times I reflected that this lack of applied understanding could have led to serious patient harms. And sadly, on rare occasion, it did. I regularly ask myself, why are these students and novice clinicians struggling to apply what they have clearly learned in their basic science classes to the problems commonly encountered in the clinical setting? And it's not just my students. Why have I heard the same from so many of my colleagues across the country? It was here that my passion to solve this challenge was born. Unfortunately, I'm sure many of you have likely seen your students struggle through these transitions from basic science to clinical education as well. You have seen students that you know have diligently studied their sciences, and you know they have answered questions correctly on a test. But now, faced with a patient, they are unable to apply that knowledge to caring for the patient in front of them. Over the years, the answer has become apparent. We have relied too heavily on our students to integrate what they have learned across a variety of basic science classes and to figure out for themselves how to apply this understanding to novel clinical scenarios. Research has shown that these cognitive steps are incredibly difficult for learners to do on their own. Expert clinicians organize their knowledge of diseases into integrated scripts. But our current methods of teaching how the human body works and where it goes wrong are too siloed by basic science discipline and too disconnected from the reality of its application to patient care. Too infrequently do we focus on the integrated causal mechanisms that underpin common diseases in real patients. Although individual institutions and faculty are working to innovative ways to address this problem, few of these approaches effectively address integration at the learner level and in a manner that can be broadly applied. To take a deeper look at these issues, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Amy Wilson-Delfos.
Thank you, Leslie. To address this problem effectively, we need to focus more deeply on the mind of a developing clinician. Although there are several well-known curricular integration models at the program, course, or session level, they fail to address knowledge integration at the learner and evolving practitioner level. Cognitive integration of basic science and clinical medicine occurs in the minds of learners and is essential because it promotes effective packaging and organization of content, such that it can be used to provide safe and effective care for patients. This framework comes from the Cognition Before Curriculum paper, in which Kulasegaram and his colleagues from the Nicole Woods Group at the Wilson Center for Health Professions Education in Toronto argued convincingly that if we are going to effectively integrate the basic sciences and clinical experiences, we must focus on developing conceptual cognitive connections between these two different types of knowledge using learner-centered, content-focused, and session-level strategies rather than the more traditionally faculty-centered, curriculum-focused, program-level approach to achieve this objective. Cognitive integration matters because research has shown that effective cognitive integration improves diagnostic accuracy, particularly in novice clinicians. And that goes back to our central goal of improving clinical decision-making skills in our learners. The challenge for us as educators lies in translating this approach into effective teaching and learning strategies, methods and tools that may be effectively and broadly adopted. We believe some of the answers lie in findings from another key study. In this study, published around the same time as the cognitive integration paper, the Woods team at the Wilson Center asked dental students to learn about 4 conditions diagnosed by X-ray that are easily confused. Half of the students learned the conditions using the standard framework called segregated in this study, and the other half were taught using a more integrated approach. In the segregated approach group, a concise paragraph teaching the basic science mechanism for each condition was provided, followed immediately by a paragraph outlining the diagnostic, clinical, radiographic features of the condition. In the integrated approach, each condition was taught with the same basic science content underlined here in blue, integrated with the same clinical radiographic feature content underlined here in orange in a deeply integrated sentence by sentence fashion. The results are significant. In fact, the lowest performing student in the integrated group performed better than the highest performing student in the segregated group, both immediately and 1 week later. Let's pause to consider the clinical consequences of this study. Which group of students would you want assigned to your case if you were a patient? Or as a clinical educator, which group of students would you want to be taking care of your patients? Now, let's take a look at how we've translated these findings into the tools we've developed, the integrated illness scripts and mechanism of disease maps, to specifically address the challenge of teaching and learning in a cognitively integrated way. But before we do, let's step back to understand what a traditional illness script is and how it is foundational within the mind of a practicing clinician. To do this, I'd like to introduce Dr. James Nixon.
Thank you, Amy. An illness script is the term for the mental model by which a clinician stores and recalls relevant biomedical concepts and their relationship to clinical problems, such as diseases, conditions, or syndromes. Expert clinicians draw from a repertoire of scripts developed and honed through years of experience to drive purposeful clinical data gathering, to compare and contrast diagnostic hypotheses, and to direct initial management decisions. Said another way, an illness script is what a particular illness or condition looks like to a clinician based on their reading and their experience. Novice clinicians naturally begin the process of illness script development the moment they begin learning about diseases and conditions. Targeting these earliest learning experiences and then building upon them is the primary aim of our Aquifer Sciences initiative and its pedagogy. In the traditional model of an illness script, knowledge of each clinical condition is organized within a clinician's memory into 3 main components. The enabling condition, or who gets it. Is it older people, younger people, people with certain exposures? The fault, or what it is that's happening in these people that leads them to develop this condition. And then the clinical consequences, or what symptoms will they present with and over what time frame. Importantly, research demonstrates that how a clinician encapsulates relevant information within these components facilitates or hinders accurate and efficient information retrieval during clinical decision-making. As an example, here is an illness script for asthma organized in the traditional format. On the surface, this appears to be both succinct and nicely integrated, providing novice learners the relevant basic science details on asthma on the right, and then adding the more clinically relevant information on the left. However, separating the basic science and the clinical concepts still misses the mark. Leaving this information separate doesn't truly integrate the information or the lessons learned from research about how learners recall and transfer knowledge most efficiently. To achieve fully integrated structure, we applied the lessons learned from Baghdadi's team in Toronto to write truly comprehensive descriptions of the clinical features, pulling in each core concept that underpins the causal explanations, each highlighted in a different color here. It's at this level of integrated holistic understanding where effective, lifelong clinical problem-solving abilities truly begin. This is how information should be packed and encapsulated in the minds of a clinician, starting on day one of their education. And this is what is delivered in each clinical feature in each integrated illness script. And now to see our integrated illness scripts in action, I'll turn it back over to Amy.
Thank you, James. Now we're going to jump into Aqueduct, our teaching and learning platform, to take a look at the integrated illness scripts as you, your faculty colleagues, and your students will see them. So when we enter our learning platform, you'll notice right away the nice blue banner on your courses page for integrated illness scripts. As we click on the banner, you'll see all of the scripts currently available with our beta set. Additional scripts are in development to be released throughout the year as they are finalized. The first thing I'd like to do is take you inside a script and go through the anatomy. So let's take a look at asthma. Each of our scripts includes an overview, the epidemiology, up to 6 of the most common clinical features, implications for further workup and management, and the mechanism of disease management. The overview begins with the definition of the illness, followed by the underlying pathophysiological insult and the environmental and epidemiologic factors that trigger the insult. We think of the insult as this body was functioning completely normally until X happened. Thus, this section provides a concise description of the basic science genesis of the disease that explains all of the mechanisms that follow. Our work has demonstrated just how important this understanding is to building a cognitively integrated clinical knowledge base. The epidemiology section dives deeper into the social, structural, epidemiologic, and personal risk factors that trigger the underlying insult and their underlying mechanisms, highlighting key pathology and genetics concepts. Our scripts have a deep focus on the science behind the epidemiologic factors, striving to ensure that racial and other biases that have no evidentiary foundation are not carried forward. The clinical features that follow articulate the most common presenting clinical findings for this condition at the time of diagnosis, a description of how that finding would be discovered by a clinician, and most importantly, each feature includes its own detailed description of the basic science, causal explanation for why this feature occurs in this condition. For example, basic science explanation for why dyspnea occurs specifically in asthma. This is where you'll see the fully integrated approach learned from Baghdadi, with science causal explanations woven in among the clinical findings in each feature description. As an added component, our scripts also include the basic science core concepts derived from the Aquifer Sciences curriculum that underlie each described causal mechanism. Core concepts are explicitly included in the clinical features and mechanism of disease map section of an integrated illness script, making explicit the important conceptual connections to the clinical observations and interwoven transdisciplinary causal mechanisms and foundational basic science knowledge. In this manner, the integrated illness script provides support for inductive clinical reasoning from the observed features back through the relevant causal mechanisms and basic science concepts to the originating insult. The implications for further workup and management sections are open notes fields to provide students an opportunity to reflect and record how this knowledge will influence their clinical practice in diagnosing and treating patients with this condition. Their work is visible in your reporting, as you'll see later on, and may be used as a classroom or clinical assignment. The accompanying mechanism of disease, or MOD map, is a unique type of linear concept map that provides an integrated basic science visual representation of the illness. Starting with the original insult, the MOD flows in a deductive, causal manner consistent with the way a basic scientist would explain the occurrence of a given clinical feature in a known disease. Each box is color-coded to the relevant core concepts, which are integrated on the side for easy reference. Taken together, the integrated illness script and the mechanism of disease map provide a holistic, cognitively integrated, and clinically relevant overview of conditions that may then be used broadly in clinical decision-making. You'll notice that in the sidebar, students can easily record notes, bookmark key content, and reference lab values as they work through the scripts. We ask that you do take the time to share any feedback on our scripts with us. It's easy to use the feedback session to let us know what you think. Integrated illness scripts are now included in our content library as well, which means you can search and filter to find what you need. You'll notice that scripts appear in the search right alongside our cases. For example, you can view all scripts available to you, or find the scripts that fit into your basic science or clinical courses. You can also search by system, presenting problem, or diagnosis, or use the free text field to find what you need. On each script, you get a quick view into the synopsis and mechanism of disease map. From here, it's easy to select scripts and cases to add to an Aquifer custom course. You'll see that integrated illness scripts are also visible in reporting alongside Aquifer cases. You can view completion status and see any notes students recorded in the implications for further workup and management sections. And in the educator resources section, you'll find great new tools to help you integrate our scripts, starting with our educator guide, which gives you a complete view of the scripts and MOD maps that are currently available. You'll also find content mapping guides, which give you a quick to scan visual list of which scripts apply to your course or clerkship, plus lists for each basic science discipline linking to our core concepts. One of the fastest and easiest ways to get started using scripts is to download our activity cards, located right here in your educator resources. As you'll see later in the presentation, they provide a range of simple and effective teaching strategies for your classroom or clinical rotation. And as you scroll down in the educator resources section, you'll also find our integrated learning sessions. They are completely developed learning activities ready to drop into your classroom with facilitator guides, handouts, and answer keys. You'll hear more about them later in the presentation. For more about how to use scripts in our learning platform, we have complete resources and a video guide to help you get started. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Kit No.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone. I am thrilled to be here today. I'll be talking about ways to use integrated illness scripts in your teaching. Integrated illness scripts brings a unified, comprehensive view of conditions that help break down silos. For basic science courses, scripts bring in the authentic clinical relevance that helps to organize and cement key basic science understanding and explicitly showing the critical connections from each of the basic science disciplines to clinical practice. In the clinical setting, scripts provide a reference that reinforces a deeper understanding of why conditions occur, reviewing basic science knowledge in a timely and relevant way to inform clinical decisions. For faculty across your curriculum, scripts deliver access to trusted expertise beyond their specialty. Scripts provide the full view of a condition, integrating knowledge from across the curriculum and the basic science disciplines. Because they were developed and reviewed by teams of basic science and clinical experts from each relevant discipline, such as anatomy and physiology to pediatrics and internal medicine, scripts allow any basic science or clinical faculty member to provide comprehensive teaching on key conditions to students, setting the stage for developing lifelong expertise in both learners and faculty. Integrated illness scripts are intended to be used broadly throughout medical and health professions education. They can be used independently by learners at all levels and have been found to be invaluable by basic science faculty and clinicians. There are applications in all stages and settings for learning, from a physiology classroom to the bedside, as a quick study guide or quick reference on the wards. Scripts can be added to the curriculum or integrated into your course at any stage to deliver clinical context, drive clinical decisions, or deepen understanding of key conditions. So now that we have a handle on the who, what, and where, let's talk about the how. Because scripts are such a versatile tool, there's a wide range of ways to put them to work. Today, we will cover some of the tools available and successful strategies to help you get started. Our team has developed a series of clinically relevant active learning exercises to accompany our scripts ready to drop into your course. The series of activities, which is based in well-established learning theory, increases the depth of learning to help students recall and apply their knowledge, as well as make conceptual connections. These activities are a perfect way to get started. They are fully developed, many with handouts included, to use in your basic science course or enhanced learning on the wards. They are short and sweet, ranging from 5 to 30 minutes to fit your needs and the time available. So let's take a look at a few examples of the types of activities you'll find on the cards. There are many valuable activities that can center around the mechanism of disease maps. For example, you can present students with a targeted assignment like filling in the underlying pathophysiologic insult, the clinical features or core concepts on the map for the condition you're studying. Handouts are provided with blank spaces on the map to match your activity. This allows learners to practice recall and trace the disease process in a way that is quick and easy for faculty to implement with our activity cards and handouts ready to go. Scripts and MOD maps are powerful tools to help students understand the clinical application of their knowledge. Another activity option challenges students to write out an explanation of how a condition occurs as they would explain it to a patient, then share and discuss with a group or faculty for feedback. The visual representation and flow of causal mechanisms in the MOD maps helps students to simplify their explanations to be easily understood by patients and families. Another easy way to build clinical relevance into your course is asking students to reflect on the harm to patients when providers lack a clear understanding of causal mechanisms. The simple but effective prompt can drive rich discussions in any course or rotation. Comparing and contrasting similar conditions using integrated illness scripts helps students build clinical reasoning skills and develops the ability to differentiate between diseases with common clinical features. Students can review a group of quote-unquote sibling scripts on related conditions in advance, and then work independently or as a group to draw a Venn diagram with core concepts for a clinical feature or complete a matrix handout, checking off clinical features and core concepts that the diseases have in common. These are just a few of our ready-made examples, and you can always adapt the activities or build your own to fit your teaching needs. Now, let's explore some of the ways you can customize learning activities to support your students. So I found that integrated illness scripts can form the basis for engaging discussions on rounds or in the clinic. With this reference at your fingertips, clinical faculty don't have to struggle to recall and unpack their basic science knowledge and can now easily walk a student through the basic sciences that underpin excellence in clinical care. You can challenge your students to apply what they have learned from scripts to not just make clinical decisions, but explain and justify their choices based on their understanding of basic sciences. Another way to reinforce knowledge is to ask students to justify their diagnostic reasoning based on the underlying pathophysiologic insult, or explain a management plan based on the causal mechanisms being addressed. Integrated illness scripts also provide a solid knowledge base to prep for an oral presentation on rounds or in other clinical case discussions on the wards. The application in clinics are also wide. Scripts provide the foundation for both faculty and students to dig in and discuss why conditions occur and how that knowledge informs clinical practice and improves decision-making. Although we love to see you engage with your students around the scripts, they also serve as a great reference tool or study guide for students to learn independently. Let students know about their access to this tool already available in their Aquifer accounts and recommend it as a resource to guide their learning on their own time. We also recommend using scripts alongside Aquifer cases. It's easy to package related cases and scripts into a custom course for your students, or add scripts to your list of assigned cases. You can also assign scripts to students on the fly in the clinic as a refresher as they see conditions or to fill a knowledge gap. They can also be valuable study tools for the boards, final exams, and basic science courses, or at end of clerkship exams. Recommending scripts as a resource is a great way to support your students in linking their basic science and clinical knowledge now. Even if you don't have time to implement a teaching strategy or make use of the tools just yet. Integrated illness scripts and MOD maps provide enormous value as the basis for an entire classroom session or to enhance an existing lecture or group discussion, no matter what discipline you're covering. In addition to our quick activity cards, our team also developed complete 90-minute integrated learning sessions. These sessions ask students to complete a set of related scripts in advance and then participate in a range of activities around a clinical vignette with small group work that includes a compare and contrast activities that examine similar conditions, followed by applying knowledge to make and defend a clinical decision. I've also found it enormously helpful to have students create their own integrated illness scripts and MOD maps. Students have realized that working through the process of integrating and connecting concepts and knowledge is a challenging but invaluable activity. You can also modify this, as you saw in the activity cards, by giving students part of the puzzle, perhaps working from a script to build a map, or vice versa, instead of starting from scratch. Coaching students through building and applying scripts and MOD maps makes a once hidden process, cognitive integration, explicit and visual, allowing faculty to assess progress and offer feedback. You can also incorporate relevant scripts into your own case-based or problem-based learning session as a reference. Our team at Loma Linda has found this to be extremely effective. This is especially powerful in groups. After reviewing a set of related scripts, students can debate the most likely differential diagnosis or create plans for management or testing and justify their decisions. I'd like to take a moment to point out that scripts can form the basis for teaching and learning at any level. At Loma Linda, we have incorporated integrated illness groups throughout our new discovery curriculum. We started by working students through the process of building integrated illness scripts and mechanism of disease maps in the first year, then applying them to clinical decisions through problem-based learning and case-based learning in year 2, and on the wards in year 3. In the 4th year, we have an integrated basic science teaching elective where students can continue developing a library of scripts for their intended specialty or based on their interests. I really think of scripts and their associated core concepts as a foundational tool or mental model that is best applied consistently. Scripts and core concepts form a valuable and enduring framework for students, connecting their pre-clerkship basic science understanding with clinical learning experiences. It's easy to build exercises that increase in complexity as learners advance. Even if you aren't rebuilding an entire curriculum, I strongly recommend incorporating integrated illness scripts where you can, and collaborate with colleagues in other disciplines and departments. Our faculty have certainly rallied around the tool. It is an interesting and dynamic way to build collaboration and faculty development around the concept of cognitive integration. We know that it can seem like a never-ending task to meaningfully integrate basic science and clinical knowledge, but it can be done, and we're here to support you while you make it happen. Thank you for joining us today. I hope we have helped you begin to envision how scripts can fit with your course or rotation. And now I'll hand it over to my colleagues for the question and answer session.
Hi. Thank you so much to Leslie and Amy and James and Kit for that wonderful presentation. A lot of great information in there. So we've got a little bit of time now to move into question and answers, probably about 10 minutes. And as I said, if you can go ahead, you can pop questions in the Q&A, and you can raise your hand. I think it's the first time we're doing that. I'll have to scroll through my participant list. Hopefully I'll see you and we can bring you onto panel. Kit and Leah, if you guys want to go ahead and share your video and come back on screen. So welcome back to Kit. And I'd love to introduce Leah Sheridan to everybody, Dr. Leah Sheridan. Great. So I'd love to get us started just on questions. Thank you for those of you who sent in questions in advance. And there's one that I'm sure is on the top of everybody's mind. It's like, you know, Dr. No, you just shared so many great ideas for using these in your curriculum, but the medical school and the physician assistant and nurse practitioner curriculum, they're pretty packed. So do you have any recommendations for how you can use these or get started with them in a curriculum that's already packed to start with?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question that I think all of us, whether you're doing a curriculum change or, modifying your current curriculum, really face. And I think it probably can be approached several different ways, but I think for us, the thing that has been helpful is really trying to understand what is the goal of our curriculum and kind of reviewing the content and seeing is what we're doing in the curriculum, does it match our goals? And at least for us, when we went through our curriculum revision, one of the things that we were trying to achieve was really longitudinal cognitive integration. And the next question that we asked was, what are those tools that we have available and what are we doing in our current curriculum to do that? And we really came to the conclusion that integrated illness scripts was really an ideal tool for us to align our curriculum with what our ultimate vision for our students are. Leah, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Hi everyone. I'm so happy to be here and answer some of your questions. But yes, Kit, you spoke to everything I was thinking too. Packed curriculum gets packed for kind of the wrong reasons sometimes. More is not always better, as I think many of us probably share that philosophy, and would rather go towards deep dives in content area where that knowledge is transferable versus just trying to cover everything. And that doesn't have very much clinical meaning for students. So I really like the illness script approach for really taking those deep dives into these really transferable concepts.
That's great. And you can start small, right? Just start with one of the activity cards. I feel like you don't have to bite off the whole thing, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, I would almost suggest starting small, because once you start with little pieces of the scripts or little approaches to using them, your creativity just starts kind of taking off at that point, and how it can really help you, your course or your curriculum.
That's great. And welcome to Mary Ellen Dean. Great. You have a question for Dr. No and Dr. Sheridan?
Yeah, thank you so much for having this. I'm actually a nephrologist teaching at an osteopathic school in Middletown. And I'd like to think that we sort of have a form or fashion of this in some of our courses where we actually try to do this. But one of the problems I see is that this in general seems to me to be a really great way to integrate pathophysiology with clinical medicine in a streamlined fashion. I'm a huge fan of pathophys. As a nephrologist, obviously, it's everything in life. But, you know, we're faced with the issue, though, of the first year curriculum is they still have to learn biochemistry. They still have to learn immunology. So before they can even get to clinical medicine. So are you suggesting that we start doing an organ system approach from the beginning and integrate the sciences with clinical medicine right away? Is that the thought process, so they can begin to integrate those issues and maybe a little less emphasis on some of the, God forbid, basic sciences? That, I mean, there's just so many more things that come out now than even when I was in med school, God forbid, but it's just so much information they have to learn primarily before they can apply that, as well as a new language they have to learn to speak and feel comfortable in speaking to another human being. So how do they start this?
Kit, do you want to start that, or would you like me to take that one?
Leah, why don't you start, and then I can add on to that.
Okay, yes, you're speaking my language as a nephrologist. I'm not a nephrologist, but I was just boasting to the team that I get to teach renal physiology tomorrow, and I'm super excited. I'm always excited about it every year. Yeah, I think it's when you have a different curriculum that isn't completely integrated of the basic with clinical sciences at early on, it poses a little bit of a bigger challenge. But I think it actually you might get more student buy-in to using the scripts just for those clinical pearls that the students kind of grasp for as they start medical school. And you don't need to put the whole clinical picture together for them. You can have a lot of the scripts, you can branch out into pieces depending on where you're teaching a particular science concept. So you can compare, Starling forces across scripts. You can compare hormone actions across scripts. So I think by just searching those scripts on where that particular science that you're teaching is occurring, you can have a really neat compare and contrast activity, bringing those together in your curriculum where it makes sense, to really kind of hone in and give that clinical pearl to the students. Like, why am I learning this here? How does that affect this system, this knowledge? How might I apply it to this system? And then they immediately get that tie-in of why they're going to need to keep that knowledge later on. So yeah, we kind of have a different curriculum as well, where I'm trying to kind of build the scripts over time versus just boom, here's a whole script.
Yeah. No, and what I would add is we recently transitioned to an organ system-based curriculum, and we actually decided that from almost the first block in our curriculum, that students actually are creating their own integrated illness script. And I was really nervous a year or 2 years ago when we first started this, but actually we messaged to the students that you will be expected to teach yourself, learn on your own. And in some ways, it kind of dovetails with the pedagogy of self-directed learning. So as long as you message to the students that, hey, these are our expectations, they actually do very, very well with it, even fairly early on in the curriculum.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Mary Ellen, for joining us. I've got a number of questions that have come in through chat. So there's one that came in from Maureen Hall, and she's asking if and how the scripts have been evaluated for effectiveness. And I know we're in beta set, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Kit, I don't know if you have done any particular effectiveness studies at Loma Linda. I have not, since they're at Ohio University, just because they're so brand new and we're just starting to incorporate them. But I'll let you speak to perhaps where you are in your assessment process.
Yeah, so so we actually started using the Aquifer's pedagogy of the integrated illness groups before actually the scripts were available, at large. And so what we've done is actually for every exam block that we have, we always ask an essay question that is related to the cohort of integrated illness scripts that the students are developing. And and so that's sort of our primary way of evaluating, if a student is learning or understanding the concepts from integrated illness groups. But because the Aquifer scripts weren't available when we started to design our curriculum, we haven't directly evaluated the Aquifer scripts in our curriculum per se, just the idea of integrated illness scripts in general.
Thank you. Another question from the chat is, are the scripts focused to basic science teaching, or are they focused for OSCE examination?
I think their focus, to me, it's really a beautiful combination between the basic sciences and clinical sciences. So I really feel that, before doing rounds, I can just whip these things out and put it in my back pocket, and that's my teaching tool on rounds. So it's actually very, very practical. So
excellent. All right, and I think we have time just for one more. And then when we're done, maybe when I'm wrapping up on resources, I could call on Kit and Leah, if you could look in the chat and anything that we haven't answered, if you wouldn't mind typing an answer in for our folks, that'd be great. So this last one is, our difficulty is taking components of Aquifer to work in clinical case scheme. Given an algorithm for jaundice, for example, how do we look into Aquifer resources to help the students work through the algorithm, learning the required basic science concepts?
That is a great question. I'm going to throw it to Kit first as a clinician, because I'm sure he has pearls about that.
Eileen, can you highlight the question for me again? I kind of missed half of the question.
Sure.
On the chat
says,
here?
Yeah, it's in the chat, and it says, one of our difficulties is taking the components of Aquifer to work in a clinical case scheme. Given an algorithm for jaundice, for example, how do we look into Aquifer resources to help the students work through the algorithm, learning the required basic science concepts? So I'm not sure if we're talking about how to access the scripts, right? So you can go into access the script and look within our searchable content library and say, I want to teach about jaundice. And it would pull up any script related to jaundice. It would pull up any cases that we have related to jaundice. So you can tie them together just by looking at our searchable case library.
Yeah, I think what you articulated is what this question is kind of is getting to. But I think the thing that I would also add is I think we at Aquifer are always happy to dialogue with any individual schools and kind of see exactly what your curriculum looks like and see how these resources can be adapted or directly incorporated into your session or curriculum.
Terrific.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and move us to the wrap up. Thank you so much to Dr. No and Dr. Sheridan for joining us for this Q&A session. I'll share my screen for one last moment to just talk you through some resources that we've got available, and we'll wrap up. So want to make sure that everyone knows, those of you who have access to the scripts, who are beta curriculum partners, Aquifer curriculum partners, I explained at the beginning. If you go right into Aquifer, and you'll see that blue bar that Dr. Wilson DeFoss was talking about has the set of scripts there. And right below that, highlighted, you'll see the green bar, Educator Resources. You click on that, you click on the Sciences Educator Resources. You'll find a really nice educator guide there. You're going to find content mapping guides there, which could help you, as well as the activity cards that Kip was talking about. and longer activities as well, integrated learning sessions. So there's a lot of resources there that I encourage you to take a look at. Additionally, if you go to aquifer.org, our organizational website, there's a lot of information on that about just kind of the science behind all this. There's a really nice white paper. There's a manuscript that was published in Medical Science Educator. And there's a number of short videos available to get you up to speed on cognitive integration. Lastly, I want to mention that we have got another web shop coming up in a couple weeks, right after Thanksgiving, on November 30th from 3 to 4:30 Eastern time. That's a 90-minute hands-on time. We'll be talking a little bit more about the scripts and cognitive integration, but really working through some activities as groups about how do you actually integrate these in your curriculum. You'll be looking at the cards. You'll be saying, okay, this is an activity I think I could use. So another opportunity for faculty development. I encourage you to join us for that. And I believe that's all that we've got. So thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciated having you here. I apologize again if we weren't able to get to all of your questions, and I hope you can join us on the 30th. Thank you.